Mortimer Wheeler faces his darkest hour as an archaeologist in British India. In 1947, the Crown Colony is on the brink of partition. Civil war is raging. Wheeler has to quit the location of a unique discovery, the cradle of urban civilization along the Indus River. Who lived here? What do the finds mean? And what about those mysterious signs and seals? The symbols have still not been deciphered. Even today, their code still puzzles scholars. Experts from various fields are trying to discover the secrets of the Indus culture. The final hours of British India have come. Mortimer Wheeler is unable to complete his work. The results of decades of exploration are in danger of being lost forever. Mohenjo-Daro, Mound of the Dead. Remains of a lost metropolis situated in today's Pakistan on the banks of the Indus. The mighty river flows through the subcontinent like a lifeline, but first and foremost, it is a moody and unpredictable waterway. What secrets lie hidden within the enormous ruins of the city from the 3rd millennium BC? Who built it? How did the people live in this metropolis, which seems to have been planned on the drawing board? Scholars speak of over 50,000 inhabitants. Michael Janssen has carefully approached that mystery stone by stone. Mohenjo-Daro has become a second home to the German professor of urban planning and archaeology. For nearly 30 years, he has tried to understand how the Brasilia of the Bronze Age was able to develop.
There must have been a reason for the people to move into the otherwise very dangerous Indus Valley. As in other great glacial valleys, the reason was, first, the permanent fertility of the alluvial soil, and second, the new possibility of water transportation by ship.
But the wide river was particularly hazardous during the rainy season. It could easily flood the flat river valley. In 1902, a young British scholar embarks on a voyage. He leaves Southampton and makes his way to a foreign world. His destination? The British colony of India. Born in the northern English town of Chester and raised in a suburb of London, John Hubert Marshall comes from a middle-class background, youngest of 5 siblings. What distinguishes this graduate of elite Cambridge University is that he has gained experience at archaeological digs in Greece. But the task that now lies before him could be more than he can handle. Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India. The Viceroy of India himself has made the appointment. Lord George Nathaniel Curzon loves pomp. He was my guru, Marshall would later say. And Marshall will do everything in his power not to disappoint his master. In Calcutta, Curzon holds court like an oriental prince, but he also sees it as his duty to administrate the legacies of glorious Maharajas and Mughals. Marshall has been called to present this legacy in all its splendor. The Viceroy and the young archaeologist from Cambridge take an instant liking to each other. The two men set about planning a gigantic scheme. Curzon lays out the priorities: stock-taking of the known historical sites and establishing measures for their conservation comes first. But, as Marshall is eager to point out, there is still much more to be discovered. Curzon asked the new Director General to submit his proposals for further research. Marshall unrolls a map and points to the region he deems most promising, the provinces east of the Indus. Rajasthan, in northwestern India, a magical region with magnificent buildings, shrouded in legend. India is the most important and lucrative colony of the British Crown. Marshall's mission begins at a time when archaeology has outgrown its amateurish beginnings. The days of adventurers or mere treasure hunters are over. It's now scholars from European universities who take care of the antiquities. Exotic and adventurous it may sound, but for Marshall, the task at hand means above all, a career. India's cultural heritage is decaying, but it's also inexhaustible. Thousands of palaces and temples are witnesses of ancient empires, cultures, and religions. The new Director General gradually begins to realize the Herculean task which lies before him. But how can he establish the exact beginnings of India's history? Where should he begin his work in Rajasthan, an area as big as Texas? Marshall, however, has insatiable curiosity and an analytical mind, and that will help him to break new ground in the science of archaeology. Mohenjo-Daro is still a treasure trove for modern archaeologists. Since only 10% of the ruins have actually been excavated, the city possibly once covered an area of nearly 2 square kilometers. On behalf of UNESCO, Michael Janssen wants to determine the city's true size. But as a result of previous excavations of the lower layers, the city is in danger of collapsing. The salty soil is eroding. Janssen's research project must be perfectly prepared. Every step must be taken with the utmost care.
We expect to find substructures made of clay bricks, and that makes the whole thing very exciting, because we are talking about the construction of a veritable platform for a city built very close to the Indus. With the annual flooding, it was dangerous to build a large city close to the river. If our assumptions are right, it was one of the first truly great cities from the 3rd millennium BC, planned near a large river system.
Was Mohenjo-Daro larger than previously assumed? At the beginning of the 20th century, John Marshall administers the heritage of the entire subcontinent. He soon realizes that he can't cope with the job on his own. He will need an entire staff to collect and evaluate the wealth of information. Fortunately, the chief archaeologist of British India has a methodical approach and examines even the tiniest evidence for its significance. At the University of New Delhi, historian Nayanjot Lahiri has analyzed Marshall's methods.
He was like Sherlock Holmes in the sense that he liked to think of things, in his mind's eye, away from the noise of the excavations, to get a sense of what was happening.
At the beginning of the 1920s, Marshall sends his staff to Harappa, a place seemingly at the back of beyond, located south of Lahore, in today's Pakistan. It seems a foolish choice. The tributaries of the Indus are dangerous. They change course unpredictably, burst their banks, or even dry out completely. Harappa's foundation walls reach quite close to the former riverbed. Back then, Marshall's men did not pay special attention to the building materials, unlike Michael Janssen.
To me, the use of brick is a fascinating element of this culture. These bricks have the same format as today's bricks, showing that there has been no reason to improve them since the 3rd or 4th millennium BC.
In 1857, British railway workers happened to stumble upon Harappa. Thoughtlessly, they used the ancient bricks as a roadbed for 160 kilometers of tracks. The city of ruins was overrun by progress before it could reveal its secret. The find seems disappointing at first. Tools of flint and bronze testified to a primitive culture. And then suddenly, mysterious plaques with symbols. John Marshall has the find sent to his headquarters in Shimla at the foot of the Himalayas. Here, he keeps receiving news of spectacular discoveries from all over the world. Discoveries he is unable to keep pace with. Leonard Woolley is excavating the cemetery of Ur in Iraq. And Howard Carter announces a sensational find in Egypt, the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. That evening, a servant announces the arrival of one of Marshall's assistants from the digs at Harappa. The excavations are proceeding more or less as planned, but the man hasn't traveled all the way from Rajasthan just to deliver a routine report. The workers have unearthed something special, and most intriguing. It's a clay tablet imprinted with strange symbols. The Indian has never seen anything like it before. But Marshall has. At least, there's some image stored in the back of his mind. And then the archaeologist's visual memory does the trick. He has indeed seen something similar back in London. Before leaving for India, Marshall had a last look around the British Museum. By chance, he came across a seal which he was unable to classify, and somehow it branded itself on his memory. Marshall is suddenly electrified. Until then, Harappa was not considered an overly interesting site. But now Marshall senses that the stray find in London and this remarkable tablet from the area south of Lahore might be the first clues in a series that could lead to an altogether new revelation. Puzzling as the two pieces might be, they still suggest a common historical link somewhere in the broad lands beside the Indus. 350 miles to the south of Harappa in the province of Sindh, another of Marshall's teams is exploring the terrain. Mohenjo-Daro, then an extremely inhospitable place. In summer, temperatures climb to 50 degrees centigrade. Rikaldas Banerjee is one of the most able men on Marshall's staff. This proud Bengali from Calcutta sees this dig in the notoriously dangerous Sindh area as both an imposition and a chance to make history. Marshall's workers are exposed to incredible hardships. They risk their lives for a wage of only 2 rupees a day. The young, ambitious assistant cares little about rules and safety regulations. His carelessness could one day cost Banerjee his life, yet it unexpectedly earns him his moment of fame. He finds a seal, another piece of the great puzzle. He immediately makes sure this is sent to headquarters in Shimla. Banerjee has no idea what the seal could mean. Finds are silent. as silent as a pyramid or a temple. Scholars need more than pictures and symbols to explore an ancient culture. They require, at best, a written language. However, these symbols have not yet been deciphered. The ancient culture that made them thousands of years ago conceals its identity with an apparently uncrackable code. It's the kind of challenge experts can't resist. Research scientists and private scholars from all over the world keep announcing that they have solved the mystery of the Indus Code. However, Harvard professor Michael Witzel and his team have serious doubts. Together with computer linguist Richard Sprout and historian Steve Farmer, Witzel has been investigating the Indus symbols and run through thousands of decoding variations. Yet it appears impossible to extract the language information from the symbols. The computer keeps spitting out useless data. It is unable to recognize any kind of grammatical pattern. So scholars assume that the inhabitants of the Indus region, the master engineers of the Bronze Age, may have been illiterate.
The most obvious of this evidence just has to do with the brevity of the inscriptions. You know, the average Indus inscription is somewhere around 5 symbols long. That's not much of a text. The longest inscription has some 17 symbols long. That's it, out of thousands and thousands of Indus inscriptions. Back in the 1920s, to explain away the fact that the inscriptions were so short, they invented this thesis that in the Indus Valley they wrote on manuscripts, and the manuscripts had disappeared.
With their theory, these 3 scholars have made enemies among Indian nationalists who accuse them of insulting the historical legacy of India.
It's identical, although you don't have that big thing in the...
A developed culture doesn't necessarily require a written language. For example, the Incas had no written language, but were still able to communicate over long distances. Other civilizations in the same period, in Central Asia or in eastern Iran, flourished at the same level as the Indus culture without a written language.
The decoding of these symbols may take years, if it is possible at all. Up to now, scholars are only able to interpret some religious and agricultural motifs. John Marshall suspects that something big has fallen into their hands. The news from Harappa, the strange seal at the British Museum, and now a package from Mohenjo-Daro. In his eagerness to unwrap the parcel, Marshall allegedly enlisted the help, the knife that is, of a street vendor. Finally, he holds the find from Mohenjo-Daro in his hands. It's another seal, like the one from Harappa. They have discovered something that had been there the whole time. Something, however, that no one had been able to interpret. Again, the street vendor's tools are put to good use. John Marshall methodically pieces together the evidence. The result is a stroke of genius. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are connected by the Indus. It's all so simple. To Marshall, everything now fits together. The whole region was once home to one single interdependent civilization. The find from Mohenjo-Daro is Marshall's missing link. The Director General's investment in a pair of ladles from an unknown Indian street vendor has paid off handsomely. Marshall concludes that the Indus was the basis of life for both cities. The river brought the inhabitants abundant harvests and assured their survival. Mohenjo-Daro has been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1980. Michael Janssen is exploring the platform which he suspects served as a massive foundation for the entire city. A drill core should shed light on the different layers of soil. Janssen is going to have a hole 2 meters deep drilled into the ground every 50 meters. By doing so, he hopes to dig up further meaningful samples. After only a few blows of the hammer, the special drill begins moving. A good sign. Janssen's assumption? They have only found the tip of the iceberg in Mohenjo-Daro. The city could have extended much further, stretching all the way to the banks of the Indus. But more samples and a precise examination of the clay beds are needed to determine the dimensions of the lost city.
Very good.
We need to do more excavating, and Mohenjo-Daro, as the center of our focus until now, remains the most important location, of course. What we'd like to find is a library, if possible with a Rosetta Stone. That means with a multilingual inscription so we can decode the script.
Unlike the theorists from Harvard, Michael Janssen believes he will one day find evidence of a written language among the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro. But the city remains silent. In the late summer of 1924, the Archaeological Survey staff come together at their headquarters in Shimla for a memorable meeting. Marshall intends to evaluate the possible consequences of their findings so far, step by step.
Eventually, he got his men and the material from Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa to his head office in Shimla, where he put everything together with his officers. You know, it must have been a very exciting archaeological examination.
Marshall gets right to the point. He begins by saying that the excavations at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa have revealed only objects of flint and bronze. A fact that might lead to a conclusion which, in Marshall's words, could change the history of mankind as it has been written so far. Why are there no objects made of iron among the finds? The answer's obvious. Because the craftsmen of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa didn't know iron yet. An answer which in turn leads to another crucial conclusion. The objects were made long before the Iron Age, which in India did not begin until 1000 BC. Therefore, what they have in hand may well be more than 3,000 years old. However, as Marshall points out, they have no way of dating the artifacts precisely. But if their assumptions are valid, that their finds date back from an epoch long forgotten, then the cities, with all their brick walls and buildings where these artifacts were made, must also be from that prehistoric era of Indian history. Marshall sums up their discussion with a breathtaking conclusion. They could be on the threshold of an epoch-making discovery. The sites of this discovery, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, are located 350 miles apart. Nevertheless, the objects that Marshall's assistants have excavated are amazingly similar. That means they are talking about an empire of enormous dimensions, with at least 2 huge cities of yet uncharted boundaries and a society to match. After a long night, Marshall is convinced there must have been a great civilization which was extensively connected along the Indus. But as early as 3000 BC, it's a sensational discovery based on a diagnosis from afar. John Marshall has never actually seen Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro with his own eyes. Yet in the renowned Illustrated London News, he compares himself to one of the most famous archaeologists in history. Not often has it been given to archaeologists, as it was given to Schliemann at Tiryns in Mycenae, or to Stein in the deserts of Turkestan, to light upon the remains of a long-forgotten civilization. It looks, however, at this moment, as if we could be on the threshold of such a discovery in the plains of the Indus. A risky declaration which, at first sight, isn't quite in keeping with the habits of this otherwise cautious scholar. Has he succumbed to the temptation of exaggeration to snatch a bit of Schliemann's fame? John Marshall knows, if he is wrong, he will be the laughing stock of his colleagues throughout the world. He needs to find more and harder evidence. Marshall hires 1,200 workers for a large-scale excavation. His work is now the focus of international attention. Journalists arrive from countries far and wide. Top-ranking officials of the British administration want to reassure themselves of their ambitious scholar's skills. The excavation runs like a well-oiled machine, perhaps because the Director General is willing to delegate authority. John Marshall opens the doors of archaeology for many native Indians. A clever move by an impassioned scholar. They are familiar with India's ancient languages and scripts and can be more than helpful in bringing a 4,000-year-old culture to light. The most spectacular find is an area 50 meters square. At first, the archaeologists can't tell if it's a palace, a temple, or a warehouse. But Marshall is certain that they have discovered a water reservoir. The basin measures 7 by 13 meters, with a depth of about 2.5 meters, perhaps a public swimming pool. At the rear, the excavators discover what looks like a private area with a separate entrance, a VIP zone for the privileged. As an expert on the history of building, Michael Janssen is not only amazed by its ingenious construction, he is also fascinated by the materials used. Along the southern wall, a special substance is detected, bitumen, natural tar, used to seal the basin.
We do in fact assume that the water was used for ritual baths, so it seems more probable that it was a ritual basin than a public wading pool.
Marshall's assistants too speculated on the function of the bath. Did it serve the priests of Mohenjo-Daro for ritual purification? Or was bathing a luxury for a highly developed society that had learned how to harness water? In some of the homes, excavators found small baths, private pools in the Bronze Age. The fact is, the inhabitants of Mohenjo-Daro benefited from a sophisticated fresh water and sewage system. Toilets that flushed are connected to sewers, which are covered by stone slabs. A system that didn't become standard in Europe until the 20th century. Were the builders of Mohenjo-Daro aware that excrement contained germs that could contaminate groundwater? In any event, they systematically conducted the sewage away from the city and down to the river.
The people of that era must have possessed great knowledge of leveling. Wherever we look, there is one thing we always observe. These people were excellent engineers and architects.
Another fascinating aspect of Mohenjo-Daro are the numerous round wells. The stable brick constructions have withstood the slow decay of the city. After excavation, they rise up like towers.
The wells we uncovered here are technically perfect. It is impossible to build a better well. It consists of a cylinder, a circular structure, with tapered bricks. That means the greater the pressure from the outside, the more stable the pipes become. These wells were sometimes sunk to a depth of 25 meters.
There must have been about 600 wells in Mohenjo-Daro, at a time when the round well was still unknown in Egypt and Mesopotamia. On the other hand, there are no temples or palaces along the Indus. Stately monuments are missing completely. And so John Marshall makes a case for a peaceful Indus civilization. Board games reminiscent of chess testify to a life with enjoyable pastimes. It seems that the people of the Indus Valley had time for leisure activities. A little bronze statue, approximately 4,000 years old, is perhaps the most charming find of the Indus culture. It astounds an experienced scholar like John Marshall. Who could she have been? A dancer who sweetened the evenings of the inhabitants of Mohenjo-Daro? A beauty whom an admirer wanted to immortalize? Or a temple prostitute, as they are known from other cultures? John Marshall can only speculate on the identity of the figure. It remains a mystery even today. But there's no time to get lost in dreams of the sensual side of antiquity. The Director General has to return to more mundane matters, like paying the workers their wages. What is certain, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are no isolated phenomena. Since then, numerous towns have been discovered, which have a lot in common with them. They are located in modern Pakistan and India, in an area 3 times the size of Texas. Dholavira, this remote town in the Indian state of Gujarat, probably belonged to the Indus civilization as well. One important similarity between the towns was their close proximity to the great river and its tributaries, which dried out every year, then as now. Michael Janssen inspects the ruins with his Indian colleague Ravindra Bisht. He could hardly have a better companion for this undertaking. Bisht has excavated the huge city and uncovered an underground reservoir. If people wanted to survive the local climate, they had to store the water that fell in the monsoon season. Janssen looks carefully for parallels to Mohenjo-Daro. Did the architects of the Indus region build Dholavira according to the same principles?
I am here for the first time and I am just fascinated. I'm familiar with many settlements of the Indus culture, but what I have seen here is completely new to me. The city was made of natural stone. Bricks were also used, but only clay bricks.
Ravindra Bisht has cleared the surface of a small platform. He hopes he will find the characteristic building materials here. And in fact, the size of the bricks is the same as in Mohenjo-Daro.
Exploration of the Indus Valley is still at an early stage. Although over 1,500 settlements are known, not more than 10 to 15 have actually been explored. Among them is Dholavira. The exhilarating part of this is that we have a long road ahead of us and we are just starting out.
The discovery of a lost, unknown ancient civilization is John Marshall's greatest triumph. But then, the time comes for the archaeologists to say goodbye. At the end of the 1920s, John Marshall leaves his post as Director General of the Archaeological Survey. India has been given both a new and an ancient identity by, of all people, an archaeologist who went to the subcontinent on behalf of the British colonial power.
The fact that John Marshall, when he left India, left an India that was at least, several thousand years older than when he had come, as a young man of 26, is, what can be more spectacular than that?
In the meantime, Marshall has been knighted for his successful work. So he leaves India as Sir John. (1944). One of Marshall's successors begins to have serious doubts about this peaceful Indus civilization. Robert Eric Mortimer Wheeler has been fighting in World War II. He's a veteran of the Battle of El Alamein. But his true calling is archaeology. Some members of Marshall's old staff are still in place. They receive their new boss with mixed feelings. With his arrival, old habits will indeed soon be a thing of the past. But it's not only going to be a matter of style, but also of methods. Word of Wheeler's approach to management gets around quickly. He is strict and authoritarian. He will permanently change the way work is done at the Archaeological Survey. Dholavira. The water system seems to have been the secret of its success. But unlike other cities, the excavators find only one well here. The groundwater must have been brackish, so the city's water supply was provided by collecting and storing the monsoon rains. The facilities included several basins which worked as a filter system.
The fascinating aspect of this urban design is that these people had a level of engineering know-how unequaled by other civilizations at the time, not in a monumental sense like the pyramids, but in the development of smaller inventions for municipal systems that noticeably improved people's living standards.
There's a great deal of evidence that the ruins of Dholavira were once part of the greater Indus Empire. A people of brilliant architectural skills. But were there also traders in these cities who did business with neighboring cultures? Marshall's discoveries from the 1920s indicate a Bronze Age economic power. Standard measurements and weights start showing up everywhere. And the perfect means for transporting goods was the Indus. The river empties into the Arabian Sea in a confusing system of rivers and estuaries. The Sumerian king Sargon boasted that he allowed trading ships from the east to dock along the coast of the Persian Gulf. This information enables us to date the commercial activity. Sargon, a Bronze Age despot, ruled around 2250 BC. Mortimer Wheeler's assistants await their first instructions from the new director with some apprehension. Word has got around that he thinks nothing of his predecessor's work. And indeed, Wheeler is about to give them a good dressing down in the best British Army tradition. He starts with what he calls a little introduction to his ideas and methods of archaeology. And, as his staff will discover, they differ considerably from those they were used to under the guidance of John Marshall. Wheeler bluntly states that their efforts so far resemble little else but a haphazard digging for potatoes. No offense meant, of course, but things, and that means procedures, will have to change. The main priority in any excavation from now on will be to avoid destruction. Dig less, but dig deeper, is the new maxim. Each site will be divided into segments. This will allow for a methodical approach, rather than following accidental finds or the excavator's intuition. Thus, each of the segments will become an excavation of its own. And since only parts of each segment will be excavated, the proportion of walls and other traces of buildings left in place will be much higher than before, and allow other archaeologists to return to the site for their own research. As to Marshall's theories, a society based on trade without an established hierarchy and the means for defense is, in Wheeler's view, simply unimaginable. Harappa, one morning in May 1944. Wheeler's lust for exploration impels him to leave the camp shortly after sunrise. The hills are shining with the morning dew, and suddenly the moistened layers of earth reveal their secret. A brick wall, more than 3 feet thick. Wheeler concludes, a prince or a ruling elite must have governed from behind these walls. Here the Indus rulers were well protected from their enemies. So was this a ruler's fortress? In order to better understand the municipal layout of Mohenjo-Daro, Wheeler now authorizes extensive excavations. He has the terrain subdivided into units of 5 by 5 meters to be examined vertically. As in any excavation of this size, the man at the helm is constantly on the move, checking the progress of the individual segments, deploying and redeploying the workforce, and, most important of all, mentally processing the results to form an overall picture of what lies before him. And once his Indian assistants see the benefits of Wheeler's insistence on established procedures, things begin to run smoothly. With his method, Wheeler is able to localize where a construction layer begins and where natural occurrences have altered the terrain. The large basin is of special interest. Wheeler's findings in Mohenjo-Daro are amazing. The center of the city rises to a height of 20 meters, and its foundation extends to a depth of 3 meters. Then, as so often during the last weeks, Wheeler is called to inspect a particular find in one of the segments. His assistants have made an unusual discovery in a deeper layer of earth. As always, when a decisive clue shows up, the utmost care is called for. Even as Wheeler works on, images of the downfall of the Indus culture are forming in his mind. He's determined to demonstrate that the people along the Indus were organized in a militarized society. Wheeler senses this find will prove that John Marshall's interpretation of Mohenjo-Daro and other sites like Harappa as relics of an empire of peaceful traders cannot be sustained, and the evidence lies right before him. It is one of those moments every archaeologist lives for. The gruesome find gives rise to a number of questions. These human remains, which weren't properly buried, are of different sizes. Perhaps a family. The skeleton seems strangely twisted. Could this be evidence of a violent death? Wheeler completely reinterprets the photographs of skeletal finds from the 1920s. To him, the final chapter of the Indus civilization was war. The Aryans are to blame, worshippers of the warrior god Indra. It was a tempting explanation in the middle of a world war, but does it hold up? Scholars who have studied early Indian history are doubtful. Michael Witzel is on the trail of the alleged invaders, but his detective work happens at his desk. He finds clues in the oldest Indian manuscripts.
The Aryans were definitely not responsible for the downfall of the Indus culture, because, to put it bluntly, they came too late. The Indus culture perished around 1900 BC, whereas the so-called Aryans, or Indo-Aryans, didn't move in from Afghanistan and Central Asia until about 1500 BC.
So there must be another solution to the mystery of the bodies that weren't properly buried. Perhaps they were swept from their graves by a flood. Mohenjo-Daro, the comfortable, hygienic town, with its well-planned buildings, probably experienced a slow death. The ruins are now threatened by a second cycle of destruction. Their biggest enemy is salt. It creeps up the exposed walls with the rising damp. The result? Salt is corroding the brickwork. UNESCO has begun a rescue plan, developed with the help of Michael Janssen. The idea is both simple and inspired. Instead of working with expensive technology and building materials, clay can be used, which is abundantly available in Mohenjo-Daro. And the method offers another great advantage. Local workers can be employed. The plan is to cover a 35-mile-long wall with fresh clay. That way, the salt will no longer crystallize on the surface of the bricks, but on the clay, which can then be chipped off.
If this maintenance work isn't carried out, the town will suffer severe damage, and within the next 20 to 30 years, Mohenjo-Daro will die a second death.
It shouldn't have come to this, but in Marshall's time, the aim was to excavate as much as possible. Archaeologists now proceed differently.
An archaeological team now consists of experts who together attempt to explore the complexity of another culture. It's no longer a matter of excavating objects. People no longer look for special treasures like gold or particularly valuable figures. They try to understand the everyday life of a past era.
From Janssen's latest research results, it seems likely that Mohenjo-Daro was actually the largest city of the Bronze Age. When British India is divided into Pakistan and India in August 1947, civil war breaks out between Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims. Mortimer Wheeler is shocked. Some of his assistants won't survive the turmoil, which claims the lives of approximately 1 million people. There is indiscriminate bloodshed in the streets. Wheeler barely has time to save some of his most precious finds. Archaeology in India, for the time being, is suspended. To the end of his career, Wheeler kept on preaching that the subject of archaeology is not old stones, but people and their fate. He has no choice but to flee from the sectarian turmoil. Mortimer Wheeler has to leave one of the oldest cities of mankind at a most promising stage of the research. When Wheeler bids his farewell to his staff, his final words are about the creative as well as destructive powers of man. "We live in a strange world," he says, spending centuries building civilizations only to obliterate them in a few days. War, in Wheeler's opinion, has always been a fundamental component of human nature. Later, Mortimer Wheeler will also be knighted, like his predecessor, John Marshall. They discovered an ancient civilization. But the greatest mystery remains unsolved. Who were the people of the Indus? Where did they acquire their amazing know-how? And why did their civilization die? The exploration of their society has by no means been completed. The final chapter in the story of this miracle on the Indus has yet to be written.